Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're diving into something that is totally flipping our understanding of DNA on its head. It's called epigenetics, and it all comes down to one absolutely huge question. For ages, we've all kind of wondered about this, right? We thought of our DNA as this fixed destiny, a set of instructions we were just stuck with from birth. But what if that's not even close to the full story? So the old way of thinking was that your DNA is like a fixed blueprint for a house. It's set in stone. But the new view, it's way more like a dynamic movie script. Think about it. The words in the script don't change, but the director can scribble notes in the margins, right? Say this line louder. Pause here for effect. These notes completely changed the final performance, but not a single word of the original script was actually rewritten. That's epigenetics. Okay, so how does this actually work? Well, here's a great way to think about it. Your DNA, your genes, that's the computer's hardware. It's the physical stuff, totally essential. But it can't do a thing on its own, can it? It needs software to run programs, to tell it what to do, when to do it, and that software, that's your epigenome. This brings us to the formal definition. The word epigenetics literally means above or on top of genetics, and that's exactly what it is. We're talking about changes that affect how your genes are used or expressed without ever changing the underlying DNA code itself. The sticky note analogy is perfect. You can plaster a book with sticky notes and highlighters, and they'll totally change how you read it, but the words on the page stay exactly the same. And these sticky notes aren't just one thing. They come in a few different flavors. There's something called DNA methylation, which is basically like putting a tiny chemical off switch on a gene. Then there are histone modifications. See, your DNA is spooled around these proteins, and you can either tighten that spool to hide a gene or loosen it to make it easy to read. All of these things act like volume knobs for your genes. They turn a gene's activity up, down, or even off completely, all in response to your life. All right, now this is where things get really wild. What if I told you scientists can now literally edit a memory? I'm not kidding. They can turn it up or turn it down, just like a dimmer switch for your brain, simply by tweaking its epigenetic code. A recent study showed exactly how it's possible. To pull this off, the research team had to pick a target. They zeroed in on a gene called ARC. Now, ARC is a real superstar when it comes to memory. You can think of it as a master regulator, an absolutely essential piece of the machinery our brain uses to form new memories and stay plastic, to learn and adapt.
So here was the game plan. First, they had to find the exact brain cells, the neurons that were holding on to a specific fear memory in mice. Then, they used a modified CRISPR tool. Now, you've probably heard of CRISPR for cutting DNA, but this version is different. It doesn't cut. It just acts like a super precise tool to add those epigenetic sticky notes right onto the ARC gene to either silence it or boost it. First up, they tried to turn the gene down. They used what's called an epigenetic repressor. This is basically their molecular do not read sign. They stuck it on the ARC gene to silence it. The big question was, could dialing down this one single gene actually make the memory weaker?
And then, of course, they did the exact opposite. They brought in an epigenetic activator. You can think of this as the read this immediately sticky note. The goal here was to crank up the ARC gene's activity and see if they could actually make the memory stronger. And wow, look at these results. It worked. On the left, you've got the mice where the ARC gene was turned down, and, yep, their memory took a nosedive compared to the control group. But then, look over on the right. When they activated the ARC gene, memory performance shot way up. They could clearly turn the memory up or down.
But get this, here's a real kicker. The effect was reversible. They could take the same animal, enhance the memory, and then dial it back down again. This is huge because it proves these epigenetic changes aren't permanent scars. They're incredibly dynamic, like writing on a whiteboard that you can erase and rewrite.
Okay, so editing memories within one lifetime is mind-bending enough. But what about the next big question? Can these kinds of changes actually be passed down? Can they cross generations? Well, let's look at another amazing study that explores how a father's experiences can leave an epigenetic mark on his kids. The experiment they designed was really clever. They took some male mice and put them on a high-fat diet for just 2 weeks. Then they split them into 2 groups. One group mated right away. The other group, though, went back to a normal, healthy diet for about a month before they mated. This setup was genius because it let them pinpoint if the diet's effect was a temporary thing or something more lasting.
And the findings were crystal clear. It was only the offspring from fathers who mated right after the high-fat diet that showed metabolic problems.
The diet had altered these tiny information-carrying molecules in the sperm called small RNAs. These RNAs acted like little molecular messages delivered to the egg at fertilization, which effectively pre-programmed the offspring for poor metabolic health. Now that's fascinating in mice, for sure. But I know what you're thinking. Does this have anything to do with us? Does a dad's health right around the moment of conception actually matter for his child? The answer seems to be a big yes.
The data from human studies is, well, it's pretty stark. A father's body mass index, or BMI, at the time of conception is a huge deal. In fact, if a father is overweight, it doubles his child's risk of developing obesity and related metabolic issues later in life. That is not a small number.
So let's step back for a second. What does all this add up to? It means we are smack in the middle of a genuine revolution in biology. We're realizing that our DNA isn't some static rulebook we're forced to follow. Nope, it's a living, breathing story, and our choices, our environment, our very lives are the ink we're using to write it. These two studies we just looked at, they're telling one single, powerful story. Our genome is dynamic. It responds. We've seen how we can epigenetically edit something as complex as a memory. And we've seen how something as brief as a 2-week diet can leave a metabolic legacy for the next generation. The key takeaway? The script of our DNA is constantly being edited, sometimes in just a matter of weeks. And it's really important to get this. We're not just talking about things that happen to be correlated. The scientists in the memory study were very clear. They said they have proof of principle that these epigenetic changes are causally involved. They're not just a side effect. They are in the driver's seat actively regulating the memory itself. Which leaves us with a pretty deep thought to end on. We are, in a very real sense, the editors of our own biological story. And not just our own, but maybe even the first draft of the next generation's story. That's an incredible power and an incredible responsibility. So if our choices can rewrite our biology, the question isn't if we're writing our story anymore. The question is, what will we choose to write?